Proszę Państwa, przed nami prezentacja George'a Parapadakisa. Będziemy rozmawiać o RODO z Europejska GDPR. Jak Państwo już wychwycili, Alfresco Digital Platform to z jednej strony obszar zarządzania dokumentem, contentem, ECM, z drugiej strony obszar procesowy i gdzieś na wskroś idący obszar governance, czyli zarządzania treścią, dokumentami w kontekście regulacji własnych, w kontekście regulacji prawnych, nadzoru, audytu. George.
Good. So, good afternoon, everybody. So far, you've had English with an American accent, you've had English with a German accent, now you're going to have English with a Greek accent. So, we're Europeans. I had a great presentation about GDPR, and I know it's called RODO here, but I'm used to saying GDPR, so I'll say GDPR. Apologies for that. But I had a great presentation, had all the details about what you need to look after, what you need to put in place, what you need to prepare. And I realized it was going to be the most boring presentation ever, because everything I would tell you, you can go to Google and pretty much find out. There are hundreds of presentations out there about what the requirements for GDPR are. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell you a few stories. Hopefully that will paint a picture about GDPR. Today, we're on 17th of April. It's my mum's birthday. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you will be ready for GDPR on the 25th of May? There's a few of you. Good, good. I'm glad some hands went up. How many of you will be okay? So you're not be completely ready, but you think, I will have done enough to get by. Again, quite a few hands. How many of you are thinking, there is no hope in hell that I would be ready on the 25th of May for GDPR? Good. I'm glad someone is honest in the room. And probably the rest of you that didn't put your hand up are thinking, what the hell is he talking about?
What should I raise my hand doing?
You're not allowed to answer that question. So, move forward 6 weeks, because that's all we've got left. Right? Let's say today is the 28th of May. GDPR is in force. We are subject to any audit. We are subject to regulators coming in and answering questions. You're ready, right? You have already analyzed all the systems that have information. You know exactly where all your data protection needs to be. You know exactly where all the personal information is held on your organization across all the systems. You have looked at the system risks and know which have sensitivities, which are likely to create breaches, which are likely to be abused by people in the organization and externally or being hacked. So you've assessed them, you know they're protected, they're fine. You have updated all your internal policies and procedures, and you have trained your people, you have trained your people on the new policies. They have all signed that they read and understood them. They're all certified against them. You have updated all the contracts with your suppliers, with your third parties, with your data processors. They've all been redesigned, they've been signed again. They have all special terms for GDPR in the contracts. All done. Everybody's trained, everybody's ready, everybody knows exactly where to put things, what should and shouldn't be stored, and where it's been protected. And you have appointed someone who is responsible for answering any GDPR queries that come, either from the regulators, or from your customers, or from your employees. You've done all of these things by the 25th of May, and you're ready. Okay? Well, some of you weren't quite sure that you're going to be ready. So what happens if you're not? What can you do? So you need capabilities to be able to start accelerating the speed at which you will become ready. So in Alfresco, we have got traditional tools around document management, content management. So the simplest approach is collaborative authoring. So here's just an example of some of the things you can do. So you have on the left, I don't know if this can point. Yeah, you can point. So you can have collaborative authoring to start pulling your policies together, to manage your contracts together. You can put them through an approval process, and you can then certify people who are trained against it and signed off with electronic signatures that they've read and understood. You can have a system drive that through. You don't need to have a manual process for it. Similarly with the other list of things that I said they should be ready. And behind that, you have, because it's run by a process system, you have a complete audit trail that shows to the regulators or to the auditors that you have done what you're supposed to do to prepare. Now, let's move forward. It's the 15th of June. We've gone a little bit further. You're hiring, you're getting new people in the organization, right? You just interviewed a lady called Mary. And Mary has given you all her personal information to go into the interview process. You haven't hired Mary yet, but you might do, or you might not. Where do you file, and how do you file Mary's personal details, personal information? What information do you need to keep to know how to manage that information? So this is Mary's CV. You can't read it, but that's fine. It does say Mary on the top, actually. You need to hold information about that document. You need to know who is responsible for it. You need to know which department it belongs to. You need to know whether you're allowed to keep it locally within the country, or if you're a multinational organization, where in other countries are you allowed to share that document? Which HR departments across your organization can access that document? So where's the region for it? Does it need to be encrypted? Or is it sufficient to hold it as it is? You need a system that allows you to actually hold all that metadata and hold that information. But that is not sufficient. GDPR requires you to store information for a particular purpose. So you need to also document why you're holding that information. How long do you need to hold it for? What gives you the right? And when should you delete it? Who is responsible for that? And what time does that deadline expire where you have to remove that document? You're no longer allowed to keep it. Because you do an interview, you don't hire the person, you can only keep it for 2 weeks, 3 months, whatever your policy is. That is what the agreement is with the individual. But after that, you have to have a process for deleting it. So one of the reasons for keeping it is that you have a legal requirement. That's your policy. The other is that you have an explicit consent. So Mary came for the interview, didn't get the job, and you asked, do you want us to keep your details in the database if other opportunities come on? She said, yes, fine. We keep it for another 3 years in our database. That's an explicit consent for holding that data. Now, again, you need to document that information inside your repository. So we built a metadata inside Alfresco. We built a model that allows you to collect that information and hold it against it. Based on the reasons of why you're holding that information, you define who has access to it. So there's a rules-based system that says, if this CV came in because of an HR interview, only HR has access to that information. The rest of the organization doesn't. So this is where Alfresco governance services with the security classification marks come into it, to be able to manage that. You need to say that I have customers, and I'm holding my customers' data for invoicing purposes, so I have a legitimate reason to keep their contact numbers and address and phone number and everything else, but only finance is allowed to use that data. Marketing isn't. So anybody with a marketing title and have a marketing classification security can't see that data that it exists. You might need to have renditions of that particular document. You need to have renditions that say, this is for internal purposes, and we have all the data available. This is for marketing purposes, and we have redacted certain areas. We blanked out the key personal information because we need to know that we have so many employees above an age of 40, and that's a distribution between male and female, but you don't need the individual names of the employees. So you may create statistics with anonymized or pseudonymized documents. And finally, any information, any access to this information, any processing that's been done is audit trailed by the system. The system knows exactly who accessed that document, who changed that document, what has happened to it in its history of its life cycle. So you can always go back and show the individuals, not only find the document, but explain to them what has happened to them. Now, all of this is just a model, right? It will be different for your organization. You set that in your policies, you define what that is. What we provide you is the platform for defining that model and populating it and storing the information there in that context. But it builds an asset register for GDPR. What's interesting though is you don't have to store the information inside Alfresco to be able to do this. We have the concept of manage in place, which means you can hold all this information in a master index inside Alfresco, but you can point externally to another system, another repository, or a filing cabinet or a box in a warehouse that actually has the physical piece of information. But the management of it still sits in the master index here. So that's what you do with Mary's CV. Let's move forward. It's 24th of July. Schools are finished. People are getting all excited about going on holiday. Some of them have already gone on holiday. You get an email which says, "Dear Says, please provide me with a copy of all the personal information that you hold for me and remove me from all further communications." Standard access request that you're supposed to support from GDPR. How do you do it? Where do you start? Who is supposed to manage that process? Remember, we've appointed a person who's responsible, but one person is not going to go around running across the organization to try and collect all that information. So we have process management. Right? It starts off a process that will manage that response. And that response may come from any number of sources. You need to have the same process responding to an omni-channel type request. So it could come an email, it could come as a letter, it could come in a telephone conversation in your support center. It could be triggered from everywhere. Now, once you've got it, you need to identify what does it actually ask you to do. Does it ask you to give them a copy of the data? Does it ask you to change an address or a phone number? Does it ask you to restrict the processing of the data or to remove the data? All of these are different requirements that you need to process. And based on what the requirement is at that triage level, you fire off multiple parallel things that happen. You will fire off an amendment to the 2, 3, 4 systems that happen to have that person's details. Your HR system or your CRM system, the documents that live in the database. If you are, like most of our customers are, an established organization that has acquired systems over the years, you end up with an IT environment with various multiple systems that don't necessarily have a single point where all the data is kept. So, how do you know where to go and collect the data to give back to the individual? Right? You may have systems that you know, like your CRM system. You can run an API, you can run a query and get the data out. That can all be automated. You can go into an Alfresco repository and do a search and find all the documents relating to the individual. That can be automated. Or you may task someone in a department to say, go and find in your department what information you're keeping about X, Y, Z and report back to me. Now, we can manage all this process and we can audit trail them, whether they're manual or automated. You might have to notify third parties, especially if you have multiple processors out there that work with your data. You get the request, you have to make sure they fulfill their request because you're still responsible for that data as a controller. And you need to manage the response and you need to know exactly what happened. Similarly with withdrawing consent or accepting consent. Now, the principle is this is not complete. This will be different again from every organization, but you have a platform that allows you to define what that is and being able to run the process automatically, monitor it, and respond back both to the individuals, to the customer and internally for audit, whatever response you need to prepare. But you have a process for doing it. Now, sorry, I skipped that bit. Skipping at the end of the summer, September, schools are started again. People are coming back from holidays. Horror of horrors, some junior temp in the web development team has just published accidentally a document on your website with 200 employees' details. Of course, you'll go and take it away as soon as possible, but that's not enough. You have 72 hours, 3 days, and 3 days might be starting on a Friday and finish on a Monday, to report back to the regulators the breach notification. How do you run that in 3 days when you have a massive organization with different people involved that have to sign signatures and sign on? A process. Now, this is a bit different. Of course, you have got to analyze what happened, what's the impact, find a way that it will stop happening again and apply it. That's the breach management side. Forget that for the moment. I'm interested in this blue box here. We have steps, and the steps have clocks, right? You have 12 hours to identify who needs to be notified. You have 12 hours to prepare the notification that you want to send out. You have 12 hours to send it to legal, to review it and approve it, and have the CEO sign it before it goes out. And then you notify the regulators, and you notify the affected parties. Now, that's great. If you do that in 12 hours each step, that's great. But you have also a clock sitting on the whole process that says, you've got 72 hours. When the clock strikes 60 hours, you fire an email directly to the CEO and say, you have to send out a letter. You have to send out a notification manually. Right? It gives you a chance, you might not always do it in 72 hours, but it just gives you a chance of being able to drive that process. And rather than running around several different groups and trying manually to control that as a DPO or as a legal person, you have the process drive it, and even if you don't do it in 72 hours, at least you have the audit trail that shows to the regulators that you thought about it, you anticipated, you have a system in place to control it. Yes, we missed the 72 hours, but we did most of the right things at the right time. So you're not going to get the full penalty, you get a slap on the wrist. Now, I gave you some different examples. Okay? There are dozens of different requirements inside GDPR, and you're all familiar with it. We can help, sorry, let me take a step back. If any vendor tells you that they have a GDPR solution that solves the GDPR problem, they're lying. It's very simple. There is no way a single solution can solve GDPR. And there's also not a technology problem to solve. Yes, technology can help, but it's your organization that needs to solve the GDPR problem. What we can do is help, right? We have capabilities that address at least 24 different GDPR articles. We won't find your data protection officer, and we won't define what the regulators have to do to be compliant with GDPR, but we will give you the tools to manage data breaches, to do the security around the information you're holding, to be able to show the regulators that you have thought about data protection and you have included it in your design of your systems to protect individuals' information, and that you're ready to deliver it. So, you've seen this diagram. That is the platform. That's the bit that allows you to hold the information that you need to hold, run the processes you need to process, run the lifecycle governance around the information you're holding, and then connect it to your various systems that need to be involved in a GDPR response. What we also have, because of the open nature of the platform and the open APIs, we have a whole group of different vendors, partners who provide additional technology capability, whether that is pointing at your file servers and saying, tell me what I've got in there. And once I can see what's in there, let me decide what I want to bring into a repository and put under control. Which of these 100 network drives that I have personal information in them? Which ones of my 300,000 employees have C drives that have spreadsheets with contact details of our suppliers or our customers? Right? We have tools that allow you, or rather our partners have tools that allow you to do that. We have tools that allow you to do redaction, mask out things on documents that are not supposed to be seen. We have customers that allow you to apply machine learning to email to identify what might be personal information and then bring it into Alfresco and store it and manage it internally. I'm not saying you have to, buy all of this, but whatever your particular requirements are for GDPR, this is a platform that allows you to bring them together and expand it into various different areas. Now, we will never be, as Alfresco, the experts in the whole world, worldwide, or European-wide at least, on identifying all the different types of personally identifiable information. It's just not possible, it's not a space. But we have people who do. That's what they do for a living. So you extend the platform with these capabilities as necessary. So I just wanted to give you a flavor. Alfresco GDPR isn't a solution, it's a framework which allows you to design your own solutions specifically for your needs. But it gives you the tools you need and the starter pack that you need to be able to put that in place. It gives you an asset register in a secure environment where you can hold personal information and protect it in an encrypted form. It gives you process management that allows you to operationalize your GDPR requirements and make sure that responses to GDPR are performed consistently with an audit trail that you can show the regulators. And it allows you to provide reporting tools that can show over a period of time how that progresses. So going back to my original question, think back on the list of all the things that need to be done. How ready will you be on the 25th of May? And if you're not 100% ready, what else can you do to make sure you're as close as possible by that time? So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much, and open to any questions. And hopefully it wasn't as boring as my other presentation would have been.